Hey there, Redwood A Push. This is Mr. Eskridge and Mr. Vieira. I'm coming at you with Chapter 4, Colonial Society. Okay, so we have a number of interesting things going on within this chapter, and really, we're just kind of going to be hitting on some of the things that we've already talked about, but we're really setting up what does what do the colonies look like prior to the American Revolution, and what's going to kick off what are going to be the events that are going to cause the colonists to revolt against the mother country, being Britain. Okay, so trade in the British Atlantic. So for the most part, North Americans had a higher standard of living than those in Europe. Although we don't have the extreme wealth that we have in Europe amongst the landed elite, the people that have been in power for a long time, we do have a relative number of people that are able to gain wealth, gain political power, social status through economic ventures. Maybe they were early tobacco planters, so on and so forth. And so colonists really begin to purchase luxury goods for the first time. We have not just the fact that people are making more money, but there's more opportunities for credit. And so people are starting to experience more of a consumer culture in which they're able to import goods from Europe. So these are finished goods. They're able to kind of compete with each other um, for kind of social clout, if you will. We also see that there's no system of standardized money in the colonies, which will ultimately cause a problem because let's say that you live in Virginia and you want to trade with someone in Pennsylvania, they might not accept the currency in Virginia. So we see different money systems start to develop, and we really see paper money develop in the colonies for the first time in Western history, and so that's going to be really significant change as well. Or development. And we, again, I think Mr. Vieira talked about it in the last chapter, this idea of mercantilism. And just a quick reminder, mercantilism is the idea that the colonies exist for the sole purpose of enriching the mother country. And so this idea of mercantilism is really going to start to play out in encouraging colonists to eventually revolt against England. So England is going to see that the colonists are experiencing economic growth, wealth, and Britain is going to want to try to put the reins on that a little bit and be able to exploit and get some of that money. So this is going to lead to conflict with their colonists who don't want Britain to have more control. They don't want to pay taxes. They don't want to be told what they can and what they cannot purchase. And so we're going to see pirateering, other ventures like that. But ultimately, the American colonies are going to continue this consumer culture at whatever cost they can. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Vieira.
All right, so I'm going to go over the structure of colonial society. So the first thing is one of the main differences between American colonial society and European society is that there is no nobility in America. Thomas Jefferson wasn't the Duke of Virginia. He's just Thomas Jefferson. Now, that doesn't mean that colonial America didn't have a social structure or a class system. It very much did. But it wasn't based off of necessarily this idea of being a noble. It was pretty much based on wealth and land ownership. Um, the merchant elite, especially in the American colonial cities, they pretty much conducted most of the social and political affairs. When we talk about the American Revolution, the guys who are the shot callers, the guys who are making the decision, they're the elite, they're the wealthy, they're the top 1% of their society in terms of economic wealth. Now, there are some instances in which there's different professions which are held in higher esteem than others. For example, in New England, if you were a minister or a church leader, that was a position of real high prestige. You were usually in a decision-making body, whether it was in town hall meetings or in the city itself. You had a lot of ownership over what was going on within your colony, within your community. In the South, society looks much different than it does in northern cities. Most of the wealth and the decision-making power is concentrated in a few very small and in a small number of very wealthy elite families. And these families are pretty much the ones that control huge swaths of land, and they're making most of the economic and political decisions in the South. There is a class system that develops, and the social pyramid for society is pretty much slaves on the very bottom, obviously on the very bottom of that pyramid, in all walks of life, in all parts of the colonies. Right above them are laborers, landless colonists who are performing a duty. Maybe they're working as a farmhand, working on a ship dock, that type of unskilled labor. Right above them, shopkeepers, artisans, people with a set skill that they can use to sell and make some profit. And then above them, the merchant elite. If we're talking in northern cities, then it's going to be shipbuilders, it's going to be large business owners. If we are talking about Southern society, then it's going to be large plantation owners and those men and those families that had a tremendous amount of wealth.
All right, so kind of just picking up off of there, since we left off in the South. So slavery really develops, as we've seen in the last chapter and throughout this chapter. Slavery really becomes an institution within the colonies. And for the most part, slavery to some extent touches all 13 colonies. No colony is completely removed from this institution of slavery. Down in the South, as we've seen in these cash crop economies, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, we see that that is where slavery and as a labor system is really developed, and we see laws. We talked about slave codes last time. We see more slave codes. We see laws that protect slave owners against violence that they take out on their slaves. It protects them from the justice system from being held accountable for treating their fellow human beings in such a horrific way. And so we really see the development of laws that make it so that slave owners cannot be persecuted for beating, branding, mutilating, even castrating the human beings that were quote unquote owned by them. And so that's a really significant issue as well. Another thing that's kind of going on and shows the agency, which means kind of the ability of slaves to show their human side, is this task system that we see in the Carolinas. So in the Carolinas, the primary staple crop is going to be rice. And rice is really interesting because it's really difficult to grow. And it is ridden with disease because you pretty much leave the rice paddies underwater the whole time. So that breeds mosquitoes and all these other bugs. And so Carolinian planters really relied on slaves coming from certain particular points in Africa that had a long history and historical knowledge of growing rice. And so that's kind of just an interesting dynamic. If you want further information about that, there's a book called Black Rice by Judith Carney that just goes into all that, and it's amazing. But one thing about the task system is that it gives a little bit more autonomy to the slaves working in the Carolinas. So the planters, because of all these diseases, don't want to live near the rice paddies. So for the most part, they live on the coast. They live in away from their plantations, and so this gives individuals the opportunity to have a little bit more freedom or liberty, if you will. So they're able to, once they finish the tasks for the day, maybe that's hoeing or pulling weeds or something in a certain plot, then they're able to go and work on their own small gardens, work on their own kind of trades if they are skilled in a certain area. And so this allows them to have some political and economic opportunities on their own, not so much political, but maybe within their own communities. And so this is really significant, and we're going to see those groups continue to kind of fight and struggle for freedom throughout this course. Quakers in Pennsylvania are the first ones to kind of turn against slavery. So this is the beginning of the anti-slavery movement, which eventually is going to culminate in the Civil War. And because of the terrain, that I know some of you highlighted in your 13 colonies discussions. In New England, the soil was just it did not lend itself to large scale agriculture. And so as a labor system, slavery never really took off, but we do see enslaved Africans working in New England, working in other regions, other colonies outside of the South, just doing different tasks. All right. So turn it back to Mr. Bia.
Okay, so we're going to discuss political culture in the colonies. Now, remember, this is still colonial America. This is not the United States of America. These are British colonists living in America, and that's really important to keep in the back of your mind as you're doing your reading, as you're preparing for the exam this week. So, in British North America, white male suffrage was far more widespread than Europe. Okay, now that doesn't mean that the American colonists were just more woke to voting than the British were. It has a lot to do with land. Land was the quintessential mark that you had a voice in the community, that you could vote.